just as I am, without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are grateful that you are here at the Kenwood United Church of Christ, where I have the pleasure of serving as senior pastor. I'm Reverend Jamar Boyd II, and this church was established in 1885. This building was completed in 1887, and we have seen 3 to 4 life cycles in this space, where it started as a predominantly white congregation, migrated to a predominantly Japanese congregation in the 1940s, and then at the end in the turn of the 1950s, it became a predominantly and majority African American congregation. And now we're seeing another turn of our neighborhood, and so we're waiting to see what we will become in the future. But we are grateful that you are here today. Thank you to Dr. Merriweather. Thank you to the Sinfonietta for being with us today, and I hope you all enjoy yourself.
Noon. Don't need this. Thank you, Dr. Toppin. Thank you, Dr. Floyd. Dr. Jackson and I will perform To a Brown Girl Dead by Margaret Bonds. The poetry is by County Color. To a Brown Girl Dead.
Good afternoon. I'm Toni Marie Montgomery. It's my pleasure to serve as the moderator for today's panel. I will, first of all, thank Reverend Boyd for hosting us today, and then also acknowledging the wonderful talents of the musicians whom you just heard. I'll give just brief introductions of our panelists. And we start with everyone's a doctor, so I don't have to repeat that again. So, Professor Louise Toppin, who is a professor of voice at the University of Michigan. And I should say free advertising because I have a book and so does Rosalind. So can you see it? Rediscovering Margaret Bonds, and Professor Toppin is responsible for this and much more, so she will talk about that later. And then we have Dr. Rosalind, sorry, Floyd, who, I'm sorry, Rosalind, who is professor of piano, accompanying, and music theater in the Department of Music at Augusta University. So welcome to you. To my right then is Artina McCain, who is an associate professor of piano and coordinator of the keyboard area at the University of Memphis. Then to my left is another doctor, Ashley Jackson, who's an associate professor at Hunter College in New York. And then she's also a Decca US Records artist. And then finally, we have our last doctor, Malcolm Merriweather, who's a professor and the Tanya Leone Chair of Music at the Brooklyn College. I'm Toni Marie Montgomery. I'm former dean, 20 years at the Northwestern University Beanan School of Music. So again, pleased to be here. And so I'm going to start with Malcolm because we owe our being here today to Malcolm. The fact that last night, I hope that some of you were present at Northwestern, where there was just an excellent program with the performers who were here and others from the Chicago Sinfonietta. And we say and give credit to Sydney Jackson, who's sitting there, who's the president and CEO of the Chicago Sinfonietta. But Malcolm has many accolades, which would take all day to address. But you heard him, a talented baritone. He's the choral conductor for the New York Philharmonic Chorus. I mentioned his academic position, but I think what would be most interesting to all of us here, Malcolm, is if you address how did you come up with the idea of honoring Margaret Bonds and putting together, really bringing her music to life and talking about all the research that has been done.
Thank you, Toni Marie, and thank you everyone for your beautiful music, singing, and with your fingers as well. Hi, everyone. Margaret Bonds has been an inspiration to everyone sitting up here in one way or another through her life as an educator, as a performer, and as a composer. We gather this weekend to correct an oversight. She didn't have a headstone. And I have to recognize Mrs. Eleanor Boswell, who is her grandniece, who, through a conversation we had last spring, alerted me to this oversight. When Margaret Bonds died in California in 1972, her body was transported back to Chicago as her final resting place. And for one reason or another, the headstone was never placed at her resting place. And Mrs. Boswell and I have made that happen. And the notion of this celebration came about actually when I was in Vienna in June. I was at the Vienna Staatsoper in the audience where I was watching my dear friend Janae Bridges star as Carmen on that incredible stage. And the next day, we went to the cemetery to the graves of Johannes Brahms and Johann Strauss and Beethoven, and we placed flowers on their grave. And a few weeks later, I had that conversation with Mrs. Boswell, who's seated here in the front row. Will you wave, Mrs. Boswell? So it was only fitting that after the groundwork was laid for the headstone that we have a musical celebration. And that's where the Chicago Sinfonietta came in, and the incredible leadership of Sidney Jackson, and just believing in this vision of bringing in these beautiful scholars and performers to illustrate Margaret Bonds' genius, and also to bring this music to a church, to a Black church, and to bring this story, as faith was very important to Margaret Bonds. It's interwoven throughout all of her music. So that is really how these 2 days sort of came together. A lot of collaboration, a lot of dreaming, a lot of heart, because these are really busy people up here. Really busy, as you heard from their credentials. So thank you, Tony Marie, for that question. And this has, I will never forget this weekend. I will never forget this weekend. So if I haven't said it, thank you, thank you, thank you.
And I want to recognize again Mrs. Boswell. Last night, Mrs. Boswell came to the stage and she spoke just about her Aunt Margaret. And many of us who are sitting here had an opportunity to sit and talk to you. Again, you know, it really, for musicians, not just playing music of Beethoven or people who are long gone, but people who then look like us, who then have contributed, but for various reasons, their histories have been erased. Or, but thanks to many of the people who were here, those legacies are actually alive. So the general question, the first one that I have, is really, what is your association? What has been your association with Margaret Bonds? And whoever would like to speak, please do.
Well, I don't know. It's on. Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Um, I first came to hear about Margaret Bonds about 1973, which is a year after she passed. And I heard Troubled Water for the first time, and I said, "Oh my goodness, this is amazing." And then to find out that this was a Black woman who had written this incredible piece, I said, "I've just got to have it." Well, I didn't get it for a minute because I was a college student and I was broke. Let's just go ahead and establish that fact from the beginning. But I then heard more of her music. Of course, we heard He's Got the Whole World in His Hands. And anytime anybody sings that, it's her arrangement that you usually hear. So I was very happy when I got to graduate school to find other pieces. I was In 1985, I was privileged enough to meet Robert McFerrin, who was one of the first African American men to have a contract at the Met. And through a mutual friend of ours, I got copies of her spiritual arrangements, and I loved them. The sit down servant and all of that. And I got a home in That Rock as well. It was hard to get some of this music. You couldn't buy a lot of it. And I was privileged enough to be able to find the Troubled Water. I think it cost me $2.25 at that time. um, we cannot pay that now. But I was interested enough to do a support paper for my dissertation on two black female composers, Florence Price and Margaret Bonds. Made sense because Florence was Margaret's teacher, and they often wrote together. They got into competitions together, and for a little while, I believe the Bonds family lived with the Prices as well. So there was a real synergy there. Um, when I was writing, all I could find was troubled water, but I did find that there was a reference to a spiritual suite on a program, but we couldn't get the music. Um, and thanks to Dr. Toppin, we now have this music. We now have this music. I think at that time I was frustrated because you could not get some of this music. This is a composer who lived in the 20th century, and we could not get her music. I thought that was insane. But that's where I started, and I've done a whole lot of accompanying for with pieces of hers. And again, thanks to Dr. Toppin, we have lots of her songs that we can reference other than just the spirituals. We have the art songs, other than the what is that? The three dream portraits. We've heard that, but now we get to hear the songs of the seasons, the April rain song, all of these wonderful pieces.
Sure. Um, my association is actually goes back to when I was a child. I grew up on the campus of Virginia State University, and my sister's piano teacher was Undine Smith Moore, who I went to those lessons. But then my teacher, my parents decided to give me a woman by the name of Lillian Edwards, and I credit her. She was not an African American teaching at Virginia State, and she recognized that I was a child that was very curious. And so she started giving me music by people of other ethnicities, and she gave me Troubled Water. So that was that blue and white copy of Troubled Water that, as you said, I don't know, it was $2, $1. Mine might have been 50 cents from Fox Company. But I had that, and I remember just staring at that. And my mother had a recording of Leontine Price, and I kept staring at that because it was fascinating to me that black people were accomplishing this. Even though I knew Undine Moore, we heard her music all the time, but this was just, it was something about the joy of Troubled Water that made me curious about her. Fast forward till after I finished my doctorate, I started studying with a woman by the name of Charlotte Holloman when I became a singer. I did 2 degrees in piano, then became a singer. And when I went to coach with Charlotte Holloman one day, after we'd worked a very little time, she said, I want you to go to the basement and see if I have a friend whose songs would be just perfect for you, my friend Margaret. And I said, oh, I don't know who Margaret is, whatever. So I go down in the basement and I see 9 manuscripts of Margaret Bonds that I had never, and I had done a little bit of research as a doctoral student into Margaret Bonds, but there wasn't much there. There are a couple of interviews and things, but nothing much. And I'm sitting here looking at these manuscripts, and I ran upstairs screaming. I was like, this is Margaret Bonds. Where'd you get this from? Because I had at least seen the handwriting before enough to know that that was Margaret Bonds' handwriting. I said, where'd you get this? And she said, oh, well, my friend Margaret. That's your friend? Because it just didn't dawn on me when she said the first time, friend. And I said, what do you mean? She said, oh, yeah, we would go and hang out with Langston. Langston. And we'd go to Hall's house for dinner. Hall, all these people that as a young musician, we're idolizing and thinking, it's almost like Mozart. It's not a real person to you, but their music, you play it. And I'm like, you actually knew her? And she said, oh, yeah, I hung out with her in New York, and we would go, da, 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 da. And so I said, how did you get this music? She said, I needed to sing some music in Germany, and Margaret sent these to me, and then I did them on my town hall debut in 1951 in New York. And so she had those. So that started my journey. I sang Song of the Seasons, recorded it, and all 9 that I found in 1999, I think, or 2000. And people went crazy. They were like, where did this music come from? but I was a singer. I was out performing. I didn't know anything about publishing. My last bit of my story is 2020. The pandemic canceled my contracts as a singer like everybody else. And so I'm at home. And by this point, I have collected, I don't know, 40, 50 Margaret Bond songs, just scouring the country. And different people who knew I sang it started handing me manuscripts of hers. And so that's what brought me to this anthology. I said, I have nothing else to do. Let me see if I can put together something that shows who Margaret Bonds was as a spiritual composer, as an art song composer, also as a musical theater and popular songs. She worked in all those genres. A lot of people don't know she had music that was in 1939's Gone with the Wind, Georgia, and that's in there. So I pulled all of this to give a better, because there was no biography of Margaret Bonds, but it was my way of saying I want to do sort of a biography of Margaret Bonds through that. I also had found the other two pieces for the spiritual suite, and though those were the very first things that I did, and I'm so glad to see um, the energy that has come in later years, as well as I was able to connect with um, the Richardson side of the family that has been able to give permission for us to push this music out into the world. So it's been a, what, 37-year journey for me or something like that. But this is the best moment of all to see this, to finally meet Mrs. Boswell, to have an opportunity to be there, and yes, to mark her grave as it should be, and anybody else that we revere. So I'm happy to have spent my life working on Margaret Bonds. She's my friend now.
Yeah, sure, I can go. Well, we'll fast forward to the 2000s. I was a student. Of music. I don't know. Okay. Yeah, I was a student at the Cleveland Institute of Music doing my master's degree, and I decided to do the NAMM, which is the National Association of Negro Musicians. And I had Ravel, Gaspard de la Nuit, and all this French music. And I met another composer there named Joseph Joubert, and he said, "Oh, you're gonna have to play a black composer." I was like, "What?" I at 22, 23 years old had never played a black composer. I might have even asked him like, there are black composers, because I was that clueless. And it's really unfortunate how institutions teach that I could be that old and have never experienced a black composer, never even heard like one of my classmates play one of them. So I said, "Oh, okay, well, tell me, where do I find black composers?" And he said, "You could go to the library. You can go." You can go. I was at Cleveland, so he's like, you could go to Oberlin, because Oberlin had done a really good job of connecting with black composers, and Francis Walker was there. So I said, okay, I'm gonna drive to Oberlin from Cleveland. And so I went, and actually one of the first anthologies I saw was William Chapman Niaho's anthologies, and it was like of the African diaspora, and it was leveled. And I said, oh my gosh, they have stuff for kids too. So that was just mind-boggling. And then, like right in the same section, there was a book of black female composers by Helen Walker Hill. And I said, oh, wow, we have black female composers too? This is just crazy. So I picked up Niaho's anthology. I picked up Walker Hill's anthology, and I saw The Troubled Water. So I didn't have to pay for it because I went to the library. But it was incredible, all the music that was in there, and I just became enamored with it. And it's sad, too, that I had to go down this path of doing a competition and actually having somebody else tell me that I should do it, and it wasn't my professor at the time. So I actually ended up learning a piece by George Walker for the competition, and I won the competition that year. But that was really like the little seed that got me into being curious about what else is out there besides the European composers that I have been playing all of this time. And I started playing Troubled Water a lot. And then only recently, when I saw Dr. Toppins, I learned the other two pieces in the spiritual suite just for the first time yesterday. I played them for the first time, the entire suite. So this is a really special experience, and I thank you for your legacy to pass it on to the next generation, and hope that I'm doing the same for the next.
So my relationship with Margaret Bonds began somewhat similarly, I think, to Artina's. So I'm in my first year as a doctoral student at Juilliard, and I'm in a class called Music Reference. It was a bibliography course, and so it was kind of a sleepy class going through lots of reference books, and it was a Monday morning. And I remember one class in particular towards the end, the professor was passing different reference books of um, sort of themes, so like music by piano composers and all of that. And so she got to one of the last books, and it was music by Black female composers, the piano music by Helen Walker Hill. And I was like, I'm the only one in my cohort, and I've often been the only one. And I'm going, I've never seen anything like this. So I sort of peeled through the pages and it stuck in the back of my mind. Well, fast forward a few years later, it was time to choose what I was going to write about for my dissertation. And so I remembered Helen Walker Hill, and I said, let me see what else she has. And she had published Spirituals to Symphonies, in which she profiles several Black female composers, their lives and their music. And so I read it from beginning to end, and I kept coming back to Margaret Bonds' story. And I often think about why her? Why did she kind of stick to me so clearly? And I think number one, I was at a point in my academic career where I had to think about my future. And for the first time, I couldn't really see it happening. Like I said, I was often the only one, and so there wasn't really a path that had been walked for me as a harpist. And so I was like, okay, maybe this is my role model. And I think also, secondly, she came from a very supportive family. She was very close with her mother, as I was. And so there are all these synergies, and I just kept diving into her letters and her words and hearing her voice in interviews and just feeling like she's somebody I needed to help guide my own work. So that's my connection.
Thank you so much. You want to also say something?
I'll just be brief because it actually my connection with Margaret Bonds was strengthened by Ashley. I had sung her songs as an undergraduate and master's student, but when I read in Ashley's bio that the subject of her dissertation was a study of the Ballad of the Brown King, which is a cantata by Margaret Bonds, I was so curious, and I emailed her, and she sent me a copy of the manuscript. And a year later, we did a modern performance of a new edition, and we recorded the piece with with the Dussoff choirs in New York City. And similarly, I reading her letters, I was so inspired by the collaboration with Langston Hughes, with County Cullen, with this exchange from New York to Chicago, and it really, we're imitating this weekend exactly what she would have done in the 1920s and 30s, gathering for music, for conversation, for exchange of information. So it really stems from Ashley.
Well, a couple things that come to mind are Tina, not being aware of the music of Black composers. And I think back to my time at University of Michigan, and Willis Patterson, the late Willis Patterson, was professor of voice, but he was then also an associate dean. And he put together an anthology of Black art songs. And so, as a master's student, I accompanied lots of singers with those songs. And then in 1985, he then hosted a symposium on Black classical music. And it just opened my world to, composers and performers. And to this day, we still talk about that symposium because it was really just an amazing opportunity for all of us. But then I think back to the fact that, yes, I accompanied many of these songs, but it wasn't until it was during the pandemic, really, that I then knew about the piano work. So I'm grateful to Rosalind Floyd. I'm sorry, I keep for her efforts in bringing, to the forefront the piano music. one thing that I'd also like to share with you that I talked about last night is that Margaret Bonds graduated from the Northwestern University School of Music in 1934 with a Bachelor of Music degree, and then a year later, she received a master's degree. And there's a quote, and I'm just going to paraphrase it, where she wasn't allowed in, of course, the practice rooms, the restaurants, she said, wouldn't serve her. She could not live on campus. And so she found refuge in the Evanston Public Library, not the university's library, but the Evanston Public Library. And she said in the basement, she found a poem and poems by Langston Hughes. And she said that basically that saved her. So connecting it then to my time at Northwestern, I actually placed a picture of Margaret to the right of my computer in my former office. She reminded me a lot of my late mother. But the fact is that, you know, every day when I would look at that picture, I would think, all of, you know, just the challenges and trials that she experienced as you know, a student here, and yet she persevered. And the fact, I just wonder, would she have ever imagined that a Black person then could be leading this school where, you know, how many years before she was treated just so horribly? But imagine the level of talent that she had, that even at that time, that they could not deny her admission, but then did not provide her with the support that she certainly deserved. Yeah. So, Artina, I know you've made a big arc as far as the knowledge, and you're then sharing these works and your knowledge with young students. And so, what do you see as far as, say, the trajectory for you and your responsibility, or just not really a responsibility, but your efforts in making sure that Margaret Bonds is remembered?
Yeah, well, I think she's been so inspirational. It inspires us to do the work that we're called to. Recently, also during the pandemic, I got asked by Hal Leonard to do a anthology of African American folk songs for beginning and intermediate the music, and so that means a lot to me too. And it's kind of motivated me to continue the journey of getting the music out there. I teach it to my students now. None of them are going to leave and have never heard any composers from any other continents. You know, actually, I never heard too much American music either. So we do make music from the continent, from Africa, from North America, from South America. But I mentioned that Joseph Joubert was actually one of the first people that told me to just, hey, there are Black people out there, you should go find some. And so now I'm actually playing a lot of his music, and I've been contracted to edit his edition of virtuosic spiritual transcription. So I feel like it's a big full circle moment for me to have him as sort of a mentor of from afar, and then actually get to edit his work so they don't go down in history stuck on his computer somewhere where nobody knows where the music is. So I hope to continue to propel that both in performance and with actually hard copies that people can purchase.
Thanks so much. So, since we have academics here, I'm just curious. Tina has already mentioned just her responsibility in sharing knowledge, but I'm curious what, obviously, you're teaching in a predominantly white institution, I guess two of them. And so, then what are the responses from students to music that you're presenting, teaching them by Black composers?
I'm happy to start. I started when I first started teaching at East Carolina, which is a predominantly white institution, in 1990. I decided that I was going to introduce African American composers along with everybody else, all along with the European composers. I had an assignment for every student that they had to prepare a notebook, but I didn't tell them who the composers were. I assigned the music. Everybody had African American music. And only when they were standing in studio class to present their songs would they say, "Oh, I have a Black composer, da da da." And the next one would say, "And I have a Black composer, da da da." And then they start looking at each other like, "Wait, do we all have a Black composer?" But it was normalized for them. They had come from high school or grad or programs wherever they were from. And so that was my approach. I'm going to try to change the world. But I said, you know what? I'm one person. I can control my studio. And I try to show my students now. I teach African American art song at Michigan. They come in and they're like, why did we not have this class? We're graduate and doctoral students. Why have we never heard of these composers before now? Each year, this is my 9th year teaching it at Michigan. Each year it's gotten better because we have gotten more information out to people. And so I'm pleased to be able to say, when I ask them to shout out all the Black composers they know, I have them start by shouting out all the European American composers they know, and it's like rapid fire. And then I say, give me the Black composers. It used to be crickets until I would hear William Grant Still, Burley, and I might hear Florence Price. Finally, somebody would say, is Margaret Bonds? You know, that's about all I would get. Now, Margaret Bonds is usually the first name I hear. Florence Price, Margaret Bonds, William Grant Still, Burley, then they're stuck. But at least they get the first 4 or 5 names. And so the response has been great. And in fact, they've been so angry. This past year, I went on sabbatical for a year, and my African American art song class was not taught. And so they actually went to the dean and said, why is the class not being, and I couldn't find a spot for this fall. And I said, oh, I'll just wait and teach it next year. They went to the dean. The voice students went to the dean and said, we want this class taught. So I'm very gratified to see that the next generation is aware, they're interested. I even told one of you that an oboist signed up for my art song class, and I said, did you walk into the wrong room? But this is African American art song. He said, I know. And so he stayed in the class. I had to completely redo my class. But the wonderful thing was that he's now a grad student at University of Pennsylvania. He wrote me a note not too long ago and said, thank you for what I learned in African American art song. It was the most impactful course that I had at the University of Michigan, and I used the lessons every day. This is an oboe student who shouldn't have wandered in there. Is what I tried to send them back to the instrumental people, but it was a great challenge. I mean, it was a great challenge because I was prepared with songs, and now my class is half history and half performance. So I had to find things for him to do. It was a great challenge for me, and it was a great challenge for them in the class. So the response, I think, is tremendous. I have not gotten anybody pushing back saying, I don't want to know this. It's more the opposite. Tell me more, tell me more. And now I'm watching them doing anthologies. I'm watching them asking me, can they do whatever? They're writing, they're doing. It's exciting.
I took a page out of one of my colleagues' books where she would just introduce the music. It's very similar to you. She would just introduce the music, and they would love the music, and then they'd find out that this was a Black composer. And then they'd say, oh, I love this. Does she have anything else? Or does he have anything else? Because all they'd ever heard was William Grant Still. So, and there's nothing wrong with William Grant Still, but, you know, Florence Price was basically his contemporary. So I am so gratified to see nowadays that Florence Price has become the flavor of the month, and so has Margaret Bonds. With some of the people that I have been mentoring, there's one young man who was a band director in South Carolina, in North Augusta, South Carolina, and he has decided to do his doctoral work in making band arrangements of Florence Price and Margaret Bond's works. So I have been quietly but doggedly pushing Black composers. I've even gotten my colleagues to do, like, they'll do a voice class where they have to do a composer, and they have to say who it is and when it was written and all of that. So I like to think I did something right. And I've had some of my piano students to play, of course, Det, Margaret Bonds, um, Florence Price, and even McCain. Oh yes, I have a student who's playing. When you can big. Oh, never mind.
It's really great hearing about the changes that have occurred in African American. I think that it was great if any of you have questions that you would like to ask the members of our panel, please do.
While you're thinking of your, oh, you have a question. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Deborah. I love the Sinfonietta. I'm sorry I missed the thing at Northwestern yesterday. I would have driven up there. Can we like turn time back and? Okay, so my question is kind of for everybody. You're really into music. I mean, really into music. Who or what did you hear that made you that way or got you into music?
Yeah. I can answer this. Music is my life. Yeah, people ask how long have you been playing? I said my whole life. And it was going to my grandmother's church in Newark, New Jersey, and being quite young, but seeing how music moved the congregation, how it supported the message, but also brought people to their feet in all kinds of emotional states. And that experience stayed with me. Music was in my household, and all kinds of music. It wasn't, one was better than the other. It was gospel, there was jazz, there was soul music, and there was pop music, and then the classical music that I played. And so I think it just was always kind of in my bones. And I'm just very grateful to come from a family that loves music.
Going back to my mother, so my mother was born in Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, and in 1928, and she always wanted piano lessons. And they were at the time 50 cents a lesson, and there were 9 children. They couldn't afford it. So she always said that I asked for lessons. I think it really was that she was then, trying to fulfill a wish, from being a child who wasn't allowed the opportunity. So at age 6, I started piano, and it just really worked. And as Ashley's saying, we had all types of music. I think I know all of the Motown songs, but that's really how it started. And then playing organ for church.
Well, my mother said I couldn't sing, so she put me in piano lessons. I don't really come from a musical family. My grandmother played music a lot, but I think really what kind of sparked me to be professional was I went to a performing arts high school, and I was actually there at the time, like right before NSYNC. I don't know if you heard of that pop band, and then there was a backup singer that used to sing with Britney Spears there at the time. A famous comedian these days, Amanda Seales, was there. Makia Cox, who had played with danced with Michael Jackson. So it was just like all these incredibly talented artistic teenagers there at the same time. And I thought, oh my gosh, I love this. I want to do this. And everybody was so driven and have incredible careers in their own rights in different artistic fields. So I think that was sort of my motivating factor to really pursue music. And I had a lot of support during my teenage years.
My mother was very much like yours. Although she did have a couple of piano lessons, they weren't able to sustain them. So she always wanted to make sure that her kids had music. So I had two older brothers, um, and they were in the band, and so I got the piano lessons. But then I followed them into the band, and I wanted to be a band director. But but how somehow I went back to piano, and that's where it was. Although I think I started out in church as a singer, singing "Jesus Wants Me for a Sunbeam." So at any rate, y'all know this song. So anyway, the I think my brothers were my guide for that. My oldest brother was the band director at Proviso East High School in Maywood for many years, Reginald Wright. And he has retired from there, and he's still teaching band here. And yes, he's older than I am, and maybe we should both retire. But we just love music. We had a band when we were kids. We used to play all the Motown tunes, so I know them too. And I got into accompanying quite by accident. So I've loved that. I've played, just done a whole lot of things. I've actually even sung jingles for commercials. So yeah, I just love music in all its forms.
Oh, similarly to Ashley and others on the panel, the black women in my family um, pushed me to the piano, into the choir, and playing the violin, playing the pipe organ. And that has prepared me for what I do today. And I am so blessed and grateful for those black women. And I think that is why I am so inspired by Margaret Bonds and her journey as a composer and a performer, and is what has brought us here this weekend.
So please join me in acknowledging my fellow panelists. And we thank you for your time today and hope that you will then pursue listening to some more Margaret Bonds. I'm sorry that you missed the program last night, but I'm sure that Sydney Jackson will somehow have an opportunity to share more of the music since you love Chicago Sinfonietta. Thank you again for coming.
Retired.
He plays everything.
Oh, that's who he was.
Yeah.
Okay, now I remember him.
We have a sporting team.
I
I didn't realize your
yes.
husband's name
They
was
were,
Mark.
yeah, right.
My professor took called University Remember, I just said the whole university got rid of
Oh, yeah.